Hi, good morning, Nigel and Julian. Nice to see you.
Morning.
Morning, Chris. Nice to see you too.
So vested, obviously something you're both very supportive of. So why, I suppose two questions. Why is vested becoming a bigger topic now? And why is it different to what went before? Julian, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, absolutely an opportunity to do something different. We've noticed that we've worked through all the different type of procurement processes that are known to man. And I think we kind of get to a point where we've done quite a few where we've engaged with the customer and so forth and tried to define strategy and forward thinking investment and collaboration. But particularly in a lot of approaches we take, we sort of get constrained because we have to, in the end, sign a transactional based deal. So all that good work that's done has a partial effect. Not saying it's not a waste of time. It is really beneficial to the outcome. But what we find is there's just that little bit more we could have done. A little bit more that we could have done to get everybody over the line. And what we've discovered is actually the roles that people play are slightly different. So you're running a large business. You want to outsource your catering or facilities management. You don't particularly want to have to every 3, 4, 5 years to have to go through the same old routine again to get a similar type of offer. You want an organisation that works with you together. But to be able to do that, you've got to be able to. Well, it's a bit like a marriage, really. You've got to take the vows, so to speak, vested or whatever ISO 44,000, whatever it is, and and work together on the solution because. You may not, in your organisation that you're running, as you're the client, you may not have all the experts in your pot. Yeah, you may have a few, but equally the big FM companies, catering companies, have the experts how to produce food, how to maintain your plant, how to invest in the plant, sustainability, all that good stuff. It's so much better if you're in it together. You incentivise each other to be able to deliver the solution, and that's what vested. Brings to the party. It's stuff, for my career, I've been thinking about all the time, but this actually puts it into a neat package. I mean, they spent 18, 20 years developing it, but it's quite simple because they put a system to it. Yes, it's bespoke to each different scenario, but what we like about it is it does deliver solutions. And there's about 80 of these deals across the world, and every single one has benefited both organisations, both the service provider because they earn more profit through incentivisation, and the client they get a service which is is aligned to their core business.
Nigel, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think separately, actually, Julian and I both reached the conclusion. I think that we were tired of that transactional approach to contracting. I think I came across vested a number of years ago when I was working on a global catering tender with Jones Lang LaSalle, and they mentioned to me the vested deal that they had with Procter and Gamble, and they said all parties win: the service provider, the client, and the customer, because the customer benefits from the collaborative approach that the service provider and the client adopt under vested. So I think there's been a momentum towards a more collaborative approach in the last few years. I think the current pandemic is probably accelerating that, and I think the reason vested is attractive is that it's a proven model. As Julian was just saying, there are 80 or so vested deals around the world in all different sectors. So it's got a methodology, it's got case studies that underpin it. So it's not just a theory, that it actually works in practice. And that's what we did the program at the University of Tennessee, because we wanted to understand it more and immerse ourselves in it properly.
Vested come from the US. Do you want to explain a bit about the background, where it come from?
Yeah, it's basically about 20 years ago. The US Air Force approached the University of Tennessee to ask them to help them find a different way of contracting. And they were thinking about all sorts of different contracts that they had. not just for facilities management, but for back office processes, supply of products and goods and parts. And so they asked the University of Tennessee to do some research into government contracts and find out what the features were of successful contracts. And at first, the research was restricted to government contracts, and they found some common threads. They found that where organisations work collaboratively, it worked better, and there were lots of efficiency gains as well as lots of service improvement gains. And at first, the university thought that might be because they were government contracts and perhaps there was more scope in government contracts to make those gains. So they extended the research to the private sector, but they found the same characteristics and they found the same trends. And that's how Vested was born.
And it's come particularly driven by both Harvard, I believe, and University of Tennessee as well. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry. No, after you, please.
No, and University of Tennessee is the home of Vested, but you often see articles about Vested in the Harvard Business Review.
Yeah, I mean, they appear right across the board. I've seen, after your namesake, in Forbes magazine as well. And we're seeing quite a lot more appear in international procurement press. And what we're trying to do is put a more of a... You see, the thing about Vested, it's great, but it's very American. Yeah, so, no problem with that at all. But I think sometimes the language, we are a nation, two nations divided by the same language, really. But the way it's put forward might put people off, and mask the fact actually what the good it can actually do. So our objective here is to put it in front of a UK market to say, no, it can work for you. And look, you're already kind of doing it already. And what we've found, we've been talking to various corporations, haven't we? Various companies, we've been talking to clients as well. And they say, well, we kind of do that now. So, and you're going, yeah, to a point you do. I mean, particularly the catering hospitality crowd, because obviously front of house, dealing with people, they take on quite a lot of responsibilities to face up for the client in terms of when you come into the building, the welcome, the food and all the other kind of stuff. But this is just taking it a little bit further, because this doesn't just sit at the point, we're all sitting in the room and talking to each other. This roots back to the whole RFP that you need to complete. You still need to do that kind of work as you do in procurement, because people like to see things written down and they want to see a contract there. But what it's done has taken the contract away from this highly polarized, determined, deduction penalty based approach that we kind of come across in a lot of FM contracts in particular, and very much a input driven, whatever people say, to something that's relational, which is more collaborative, and that we're in it together. And they talk about in Vested, they talk about two in a box, for example, where the CFO from the corporation links exactly with the CFO from the service provider, and in fact they're all seen together. In fact, it's a top and bottom down type approach. So everybody throughout the organisations are working together, and in fact I'll just mobilise the contract on that basis. So already some of the narrative is getting into what we're doing now, and we can see the benefits, but it's just want to take it a little bit further and actually sort of that's where it is. But we are kind of constrained at the moment because we are in old school approach, that's what we've always done, so why should we change it? And what we're doing here is trying to introduce things to the market, which is common sense. And as you said, a lot of it is common sense. It's logical, straightforward, and why shouldn't we do it? It's about trust.
Well, look, I think as you said earlier, Nigel, this has been coming for some time, hasn't it? The pandemic's probably acting as a catalyst, but people have been wanting greater partnerships now, calling for greater partnership and openness now for some time, haven't they?
Yeah, and I think through lockdown, service providers and clients have had to work more closely together to overcome the obstacles that lockdown has brought, and to think about new ways of working, what's going to be required when people start returning to the office. So I think it has accelerated that whole approach, I think.
There's been quite a lot of tensions in the market, haven't there, over the years, between all the various things. This should ease that quite considerably, shouldn't it?
It should, because actually the majority of vested contracts result from existing relationships. So you can procure a vested contract, you can do it through a procurement process, but it's much more commonplace for it to be an existing relationship between a service provider and a client. And there are some tools you can use at the beginning when you're thinking about doing vested, which will tell you where the relationship sits and whether the relationship is at the right point to move to a vested deal. But that's the most common. They're the most common circumstances to arrive at a vested contract.
So, where are the best case studies that you can look towards to see where this works?
Well, there are lots of case studies in the US, as Julian mentioned. There are quite a lot in Scandinavia. So the Scandinavian countries have embraced vested, and in the facilities management arena in particular. But in the UK now, there are two vested deals. So one is between Johnson & Johnson and Sodexo, which was put together in continental Europe, but includes the UK. And the other one is a global vested facilities management deal between BP and Jones Lang LaSalle. And that deal, whilst it's global, was put together in the UK. So you've got two really good examples now of vested contracts in the facilities management arena in the UK. So again, we see that as a good springboard to accelerate the introduction of vested.
I think the most important aspect is, say, from the Johnson & Johnson perspective, they had a lot of these things come out of adversity, and what we find is there's two or three things that they just can't get right. And I think Johnson & Johnson, we'll discover as we go through this series, that they had a particularly poor relationship with their supplier, and they decided to sit round, talk about the issues they had, elephants in the room, if you like, and they went, well, let's do it differently. And out of all the contracts they run, that's the most successful. It has the least amount of impact in terms of management time, and certainly they benefited for COVID because they just got on with it. None of this force majeure stuff thrown around and all the other stuff that people were forced to, because that's the way the contracts are written, to be fair. And BP one, I think, BP themselves have completely reinvented themselves away from being a petrol, diesel, fuel type organisation to a sustainable, energy efficiency, the carbon neutral future. And I think they were probably going, well, we've been doing whatever we've been doing for 20, 25 years. It's worked. Here's an opportunity to do something else. And of course, as Nigel's mentioned several times, JLL, not going to be plugging for them, but they have been at the forefront of a lot of the deals, particularly in FM. One of the big ones is Procter & Gamble as well. That's been going for 20 years. And the benefits out of that are phenomenal, to the point actually that P&G had their own estates or property department, and when they got into the vested deal, they said, well, why are we working for Procter & Gamble? The expertise is sitting with JLL, so all the people who are involved in that element don't work for P&G. Well, they do, but as their partner, not as their employer. And the benefits have been absolutely significant. They've saved money, they've done all sorts of them. I think reported it's about 40% on their cost. But the key thing is, and where we tend to go wrong, and the trouble is with procurement, it just focuses on a narrow service as opposed to the total cost of operation. Don't count the client management costs and the space costs and all the other aspects. So it's a much more holistic approach. And Nigel and I have spoken about this in the past. There's all that happening over there. Why can't we roll that in? And everybody's got to be part of the game. And to the point that where vested deals are in place, and this is more referring back to one of the situation when you went to Knoxville, Nigel, where the client changes in the or a key person, where anybody changes in the organisation, they have to go through the vested course, so they fully understand it. This is concept about a new sheriff in town who comes along, I'm just going to bring it back to what it was. No, they go along and understand the whole narrative. It's only when you go and do those courses you suddenly realise, whilst on the face of it looks fairly straightforward, It's about understanding the methodology and all the other stuff that goes around it. So people claim that they've got a vested contract. They're probably a lot of the way there, but it's like any other accreditation, I guess. People have got to be in the same room. They've got to understand the methodology. They've got to understand the way it works, the criteria, and everything else. And it's so much better because the benefits that come out of it are absolutely significant.
I mean, you talked about this a lot in Do Architects, but it seems quite a common sense, rational way to approach business that's becoming more popular. Is it really that much harder to understand?
Well, look, when I was a client, no, because the organisation I worked for was kind of polarised. It was an us and them type scenario. We're the BBC. We're going to tell you what you're going to get for your service, and a lot of organisations are very similar because they've spent a lot of time and money on writing specification and so forth. But the whole rationale is wrong, and so the idea of bringing people together, you get so much benefit, and that's not even if you've got lots of different suppliers, you can bring them all together. If you've got a security and a caterer and a maintenance, get them all in the same room because at least one, it's about communications, isn't it? It's about making sure that there's a consistent approach right across your business, what needs to happen. So if you've got some immediate priorities, you can sit there with the same people and all together and coordinate the maintenance, the security, the catering, if there's a special event or whatever else, as opposed to try to do it all separately or reading from, well, you're on the hook to do this and so forth. There's quite a few scenarios that we end up getting parachuted into where it's all gone horribly wrong. And everybody's polarised, dug in their trench, throwing things at each other. It's all very contractual and miserable and horrible. And it's no benefit to any of the customers, whatever they are, patients, students, prisoners, if you like, or lawyers and bankers, whatever else who have to receive the services. It's about them getting served properly and the organisation benefits. It's a win-win thing. They talk about we're in it for we. So it's very much togetherness.
Nigel?
It does. I think you do have to work quite hard at it to implement it properly because it requires a completely different mindset from the traditional way of contracting. And you've got to embed that mindset at all levels in the organisation.
Yeah.
Because what you actually focus on are what are the desired outcomes from the contract. And then you let the service provider decide how they deliver those desired outcomes. So you don't interfere in that. And in traditional contracts, it's about almost telling the contractor how they're going to do it. So in order to embed that completely different approach, you do have to do a lot of work to change mindsets in both organizations at different levels, right to the most senior level in both organizations. Because it's no point in the people who are involved in the services day to day putting together a vested deal, because otherwise, when it goes to be signed off by the executive in both organisations, if they've not been brought into the process, it won't be successful. It may not be signed off because it's a completely different way of contracting, and both parties share in the success, both operationally and commercially.
So it's like a joint venture.
Almost.
It's almost. In fact, when you do the program, one of the early slides that they show you is this continuum, which at the bottom is, very basic transactional contract, us and them, all the way through to at the top to a formal legal joint venture. And actually, you go from transactional to relational. Relational is much better than transactional. You may be a preferred provider to the client. You may be on some performance incentives. Joint venture is obviously a legal entity where both parties. Vested just sits underneath the joint venture. So it's a joint venture in all but legal form, basically.
Yeah, I suppose some successful projects, I guess, between me and Nigel are probably the one step before the vested, aren't they? Wouldn't you think, Nigel?
Sorry, what was that, Julian?
Would you say that quite a lot of our more successful projects or procurements are the ones that are just one step before vested?
Yeah.
Where we incentivize and, we get people around, and we tend to be more catalysts in that. We have an ongoing relationship with the organisations to help them through. It's like, I don't use this negatively, but it's like ongoing mediation in a way, isn't it? So it's we're there as a trusted partner rather than just being a consultant that's just following a particular process.
And isn't this what the market's been crying out for, really, privately, for quite some time?
Yeah, I think so. Vested is not right for every single contract. You may do some of the upfront work and find that you're not ready for vested, or it's not the right set of circumstances. But what it could certainly help you do is to get the relationship and the contract on a much more collaborative footing. So vested won't be right for everybody, but certainly a more collaborative approach is going to be much better in almost every circumstance I can think of.
I agree. Julian, you're a great believer in that as well, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. So somebody asked me the question the other day, and I said, well, cleaning contract, probably no, because it's a defined space. It's quite scientific. You just put the service in, so that's less likely. But if it's part of a bigger FM deal, that might be a different scenario. So yeah, transactions are required. Day-to-day type activity, retail, that kind of stuff. But as we move up, I think more and more complex contracts, you can see the absolute benefit. But it is, as we keep saying, it's a mindset, and I think and it needs to be. I mean, we have that mindset when we go, when we're at university or college or whatever else, because we're all in it together. And a lot of our relationships that we have through our careers are still with the people that we're at school or college with, as well as the people we've worked with. So we've ended up, in our own organisations working together. I mean, or we've reached out to each other. For example, we're working collaboratively with Litmus because it makes absolute sense. We worked together before. We occasionally compete because sometimes we're kind of forced to do that, but because the market dictates. But most of the time, it's about our skills and abilities. And Nigel's got one bag of skills and abilities. I have another, and we're quite complementary in that. And I think that's if you map that across an organisation, that's the same sort of thing. Even if you've got, say, two accountants, two finance people in the room, the guy from or the lady from the client side may have one particular view, whereas on the contractor side, something different. I mean, Microsoft and Accenture is a good example of that, isn't it? Where they're doing all the back office stuff, and when you look at their makeup, there's little boxes and the two in the box type thing. So Microsoft do one bit, Accenture do another. They're all interrelated. All the tech is all joined up. All the communications are tight. They all meet together as if they're the same team. I've always argued the fact that you work for the same organisation, whether you're paid by a paycheck or you're paid by an invoice. It matters little. It's about the common objective, and as desired outcomes, guiding principles, all those kind of good stuff. And it's just setting out good planning. That's what it is. It's good planning and working together. Now, sometimes. It moves through a cycle, and maybe the organisation changes and wants to do something else. But most of the time we're vested in, it's retained, remained, and moved on, because there's been less of a reason why we would want to change, because we've got the people that we want. There are organisations clearly in there have to review their position every so often, but that's absolutely fine. In the end, it's about outcomes, isn't it?
Look, you're launching a new website, I think, on this. This is obviously something you're both very much supportive of. What's your hope for what can be achieved over the next couple of years?
We're launching a UK page on the Vested website to promote the concept of Vested in the UK. And we'd like it to get some traction. We've been doing a number of presentations to different service providers who have expressed a real interest in Vested, and we're looking to spread the word to get contracts on a much more positive and collaborative footing. And as Julian said, Litmus and Nella Davis are collaborating. This is something we're going to work on together, and we're looking to promote that approach across the hospitality sector and across the facilities management sector, because it will benefit everybody. It will benefit the clients, it'll benefit the service providers, and it benefits the customers. The customers also see lots of improvements and lots of benefits from the two organisations working together.
It must be the right way forward, yes? It must be. It's a logical thing now, isn't it, Julian? It puts all the tensions away, doesn't it?
I think it's about being open and honest with you. So there's a whole load of sort of it's about behavioural economics to a certain extent, isn't it? So it's about it's understanding the emotions around it as well as the commercial element. So it's around about trust, respect, I can never say this word, reciprocity, and so on and so forth. It's really getting together. It's like a marriage, and dare I say that, because people go, oh God, no. Don't particularly think that's a good plan, but actually it is, because I think if you've got a common objective, you have to work through the hard bits, the good bits. You're only as good as your last meal type scenario. But instead of whacking somebody with a big deduction because they haven't done something, it's like, let's just wind back and what's the reason why this has happened? Where have we both failed to achieve something? And I think in a sensible grown-up discussion, you can work that through, because you need each other. Because in a highly integrated facilities management operation, where the first people you interface with in any large corporation is going to be the facilities management staff, they're representing your company. So it is in your best interest to make sure you're all together. And that should cascade right the way through the organisation, not just the C-suite managers. It's all the way through, all the way down to it's putting the man on the moon scenario, isn't it? We're all in it together. We're putting a new product out. We need to work together to make sure that our client, our team are successful. It is about that, one version of the truth, one organisation together. Not an organisation, as we've seen in some scenarios, where it just goes too much the other way, where the corporation is just singularly trying to control the market. It is not that. It's about collaboration, working together, and meeting the customer's requirements, because in the end, if the customers don't come to you, you haven't got a business, all of you.
I agree. Oh, look, thank you very much. That's great. It's been a great half hour. Thank you very much for the chat, and I look forward to seeing how this progresses forward from here on.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Okay,
thanks for the opportunity.
Pleasure.
Thanks.